The morning sun cast long shadows across the remote training facility as Sarah Martinez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. Around her, a dozen male recruits whispered among themselves, their voices carrying a mix of amusement and doubt. At 5 feet 4 inches with a slight build, Sarah looked more like a college student than someone who belonged on a military shooting range. "You sure you can handle that rifle, sweetheart?" called out Jake Morrison, a burly former Marine with arms like tree trunks. His comment drew snickers from the group. "That thing's almost as big as you are." Sarah didn't respond. She'd heard variations of this comment countless times over the past 5 years. Instead, she continued her methodical preparation, checking her breathing technique and adjusting her position. The rifle in her hands was a precision instrument, a custom-built .308 Winchester that had cost her 3 months' salary from her civilian job as a software developer. The shooting instructor, Sergeant Davis, stepped forward with his clipboard. He was running an advanced marksmanship course for law enforcement and military personnel, and today's challenge was particularly demanding. Targets were positioned at 800 yards, with additional obstacles including wind flags that showed gusty conditions and varying elevations that would test even experienced shooters. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we're separating the wheat from the chaff," Davis announced in his gravelly voice. 800 yards, 10 shots, scoring will be based on grouping and accuracy. Those who can't maintain a 6-inch grouping should consider finding a new hobby. The other participants were an intimidating bunch. Besides Jake, there was Marcus Thompson, a former Army Ranger whose chest was covered in service ribbons. Next to him stood David Chen, a SWAT team member from Chicago who'd reportedly never missed a qualifying score in 15 years. The rest were a mix of Special Forces veterans, police marksmen, and competitive shooters. All men, all confident, and all eyeing Sarah with expressions that ranged from confusion to barely concealed condescension. "I still don't understand why they're letting civilians participate," muttered Carlos Rivera, a Border Patrol agent whose reputation preceded him. "This course is designed for professionals." Sarah overheard the comment and felt the familiar burn in her chest. Not anger exactly, but something deeper. A determination that had been forged through years of proving herself in spaces where she wasn't welcome. She thought about her father, a Vietnam veteran who'd taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old on their family farm in Texas. He'd never treated her differently because she was a girl, never suggested that marksmanship wasn't for her. "Your gender doesn't pull the trigger," he used to say. "Your mind does." The first shooter stepped up to the line. It was Marcus, the former Ranger. He took his time, adjusting his position multiple times before settling in. The range fell silent except for the whistle of wind through the target stands. His first shot rang out, followed by 9 more in quick succession. When the scoring was called in via radio, Marcus had achieved a respectable 7-inch grouping with 8 shots in the scoring rings. "Not bad, Thompson," Sergeant Davis called out, "but not great either." One by one, the other shooters took their turns. Jake managed a 9-inch grouping with several shots completely missing the target. Carlos performed better with a 6.5-inch group, earning nods of approval from the instructor. David Chen, the SWAT officer, surprised everyone with a 5-inch grouping that had the others talking in impressed whispers. "Now that's shooting," Davis said, making a note on his clipboard. "Chen, you're setting the bar pretty high." As each shooter completed their round, the pressure built. Sarah noticed the glances becoming more frequent, the whispered comments more pointed. She was the only woman in a group of supposed professionals carrying a rifle that cost more than most of their monthly salaries, and she hadn't said more than a dozen words since arriving at the facility. "Martinez, you're up," Davis called. Sarah rose from her position on the ground where she'd been observing the other shooters. She'd been studying the wind patterns, noting how they affected each shooter's performance. The flags at 400 yards showed a consistent left-to-right crosswind, but at 600 yards the pattern shifted, creating a swirling effect that had thrown off several of the previous shooters. She approached the firing line with quiet confidence, her movements economical and precise. Unlike the others who'd taken considerable time adjusting their positions, Sarah seemed to flow into her shooting stance naturally. She'd done this thousands of times before, though none of the watching men knew that. "Take your time, miss," Davis said, his tone slightly gentler than it had been with the others. "This isn't easy even for experienced shooters." Sarah nodded politely but didn't respond verbally. She was already sinking into what she privately called the zone, a state of complete focus where everything else faded away except the target, the wind, and the mechanics of making a perfect shot. She chambered her first round and settled in behind the scope. Through the lens, the target looked impossibly small and distant. At 800 yards, the bullseye was barely visible, and the slightest error in calculation or execution would send the bullet wide of the mark. Her breathing slowed to a methodical rhythm. In, hold, natural pause, fire, follow through. It was a pattern ingrained so deeply that it had become instinctive. She could feel the wind on her face, could see how it was affecting the grass around the target stands. Years of experience had taught her to read these signs like a language. The first shot surprised even her with its perfection. Through the scope, she could see the bullet hole appear dead center in the bull's eye. Behind her, she heard someone whisper, "Lucky shot," but she was already preparing for the second round. Shot after shot, Sarah's bullets found their mark with mechanical precision. Each one landed within inches of the others, building a tight group that was smaller than anything the other shooters had achieved. She wasn't just hitting the target, she was creating a cluster of holes that would have impressed Olympic-level competitors. The range had gone completely silent. Even Davis had stopped writing on his clipboard and was watching through his spotting scope with an expression of growing amazement. After the 10th shot, he called for a ceasefire and radioed down to the target pit for scoring. The wait seemed to stretch forever. Sarah remained in position, her rifle still trained on the target, though she already knew the results would be good. She could feel the stares of the other participants boring into her back, could practically hear their assumptions crumbling. "Martinez," Davis's voice cut through the silence, and for the first time that day there was genuine respect in his tone. 2.75-inch grouping. 10 for 10 in the scoring rings, 9 in the X ring. The number hung in the air like a challenge to everything the other shooters had believed about their own abilities. 2.75 inches at 800 yards was approaching competition-level accuracy. It was the kind of shooting that most of them had only heard about in stories. Jake Morrison was the first to break the stunned silence. "That's impossible," he said, his voice carrying more confusion than hostility. "Nobody shoots groups that tight at 800 yards, not with field conditions." Sarah finally stood and turned to face the group. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small smile. "The rifle doesn't know I'm a woman," she said quietly, echoing her father's words from decades before. "And the target doesn't care what you think about my qualifications." Marcus Thompson shook his head slowly. "I've seen some shooting in my time," he said, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "But that was something else entirely. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah shouldered her rifle and began packing her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown throughout her performance. "Practice," she said simply. "Lots and lots of practice." But even as she deflected their questions with humble answers, Sarah carried secrets that would have changed everything they thought they knew about her. The badge hidden in her gear bag wasn't just any law enforcement identification. The patches folded carefully in her kit weren't from weekend warrior training courses. And the rifle that had drawn their mockery had been with her through situations these men could barely imagine. As the group prepared for the afternoon session, Sarah caught Sergeant Davis watching her with calculating eyes. She wondered if he suspected there was more to her story than she was letting on. The morning had been about proving she belonged. The real test would come when the stakes were raised and the shooting became more than just target practice. Tomorrow would bring scenarios designed to test not just accuracy, but decision-making under pressure. Sarah had excelled at those kinds of challenges before, but always in situations where her identity and credentials were known. Here she was still just the quiet woman with the expensive rifle who'd somehow embarrassed a group of professionals. She thought about the badge in her bag and wondered how much longer she could maintain the pretense. The truth would come out eventually. It always did. But for now, she was content to let her shooting do the talking. After all, she'd been underestimated before, and it had never stopped her from getting the job done. The afternoon sun was climbing higher, and Sarah knew the real challenges were just beginning. The afternoon session began with a dramatic shift in atmosphere. Word of Sarah's morning performance had spread beyond their training group, drawing curious observers from other courses running at the facility. Sergeant Davis had restructured the entire day's agenda, replacing basic accuracy drills with advanced tactical scenarios that would push every participant to their limits. "This isn't target shooting anymore," Davis announced to the assembled group. "We're moving to tactical scenarios, multiple targets, time constraints, and stress factors designed to simulate real-world conditions." The first scenario involved a hostage situation simulation. Cardboard cutouts of civilians were positioned among legitimate targets at distances ranging from 200 to 600 yards. Participants had 30 seconds to identify and engage 5 specific threats while avoiding hitting any innocent bystanders. A mistake meant immediate disqualification. Jake Morrison, still smarting from his morning performance, volunteered to go first. His confidence had been shaken by Sarah's display, and it showed in his shooting. He correctly identified 4 targets, but his shots were scattered, and his final round took nearly 8 seconds to execute. When the scoring came back, only 2 of his 5 shots had been clean hits. "In a real situation, Morrison, 3 hostages would be dead and the bad guys would still be shooting," Davis said bluntly. "Try to remember that precision matters more than speed when lives are on the line." Marcus Thompson performed better, managing 4 clean hits in 28 seconds, but his unfamiliarity with the scenario format showed. David Chen, drawing on his SWAT experience, executed a nearly flawless run with 4 hits and 1 marginal shot that would have stopped the threat. "Chen, that's how it's done," Davis said with approval. "Smooth, controlled, effective." When Sarah's turn arrived, the casual observers had grown to include several instructors from other courses. She'd become a curiosity. The civilian woman who'd embarrassed a group of law enforcement and military professionals. Some had come to see if the morning's performance was a fluke. Sarah approached the scenario differently than the others. Instead of rushing into position, she spent several precious seconds studying the target array through her scope, memorizing the positions and identifying the shooting sequence that would be most efficient. Her military training had taught her that time spent in preparation was never wasted. When she began shooting, the difference was immediately apparent. Her movements were fluid and confident, each shot executed with mechanical precision. She engaged the targets in an order that minimized scope adjustment time, flowing from one shot to the next with barely a pause. Her breathing never became labored, her position never wavered. 22 seconds after she began, Sarah had delivered 5 perfect shots to 5 legitimate targets. Every hit was center mass, every decision instant and correct. The casual observers erupted in surprised murmurs, but Sarah was already clearing her rifle and preparing to leave the line. "Martinez!" Davis called out, and there was something different in his voice now. "Stay after the others finish. I want to talk to you." The remaining scenarios continued to separate Sarah from the pack. A moving target exercise designed to simulate engaging threats from a vehicle saw her maintaining accuracy while dealing with simulated vibration and time pressure. A low-light scenario using specialized equipment tested her ability to adapt to challenging conditions. Each time, she performed at a level that seemed to belong in a different league entirely. By late afternoon, the gap had become embarrassing. Sarah wasn't just outperforming the other participants, she was making them look like amateurs. Jake Morrison had grown increasingly sullen with each scenario, while Marcus Thompson had begun asking technical questions about her equipment, searching for some explanation for her dominance. "There's no way a civilian develops that kind of skill set," Carlos Rivera muttered to anyone who would listen. "I don't care how much she practices on weekends." David Chen, whose professional pride had taken several hits throughout the day, was more direct in his suspicions. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he told the group during a break. "I've seen Olympic shooters who couldn't perform like that under stress. She's had training that goes way beyond civilian courses." Sarah overheard the conversations but continued to deflect personal questions with vague answers about growing up on a ranch and enjoying competitive shooting. She knew the facade was becoming harder to maintain, especially with Sergeant Davis watching her with increasingly sharp eyes. The final scenario of the day was designed to be the ultimate test. Participants faced multiple targets at extreme range in challenging wind conditions, with additional stressors including time pressure and simulated radio chatter designed to break concentration. It was the kind of shooting that separated true professionals from talented amateurs. One by one, the other participants struggled with the demands of the scenario. The extreme range pushed their equipment to its limits, and the environmental conditions made precise shooting nearly impossible. Jake Morrison managed only one hit out of 3 attempts. Marcus Thompson connected twice but required nearly the full-time allocation. When Sarah took position for the final scenario, the crowd of observers had grown even larger. Word was spreading throughout the facility about the civilian woman who was dominating a course designed for law enforcement and military professionals. Sarah studied the scenario through her scope, calculating wind speed and direction, estimating the corrections needed for the extreme range. At 1,200 yards, the targets were barely visible, even through high-powered optics. The wind was gusting unpredictably, and the time constraint meant there was no opportunity for ranging shots or adjustments. She settled into her shooting position with the calm confidence of someone who had faced similar challenges under much more serious circumstances. Her breathing slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that had served her in situations where missing meant more than just a poor score. The first shot was perfect. Through her scope, she watched the distant target react to the impact exactly where she had aimed. The second shot, adjusted for a wind shift she had detected between attempts, was equally precise. For her third and final shot, she made a bold correction based on nothing more than instinct and experience, sending the bullet on a trajectory that curved through the shifting wind to find its mark. 3 shots, 3 perfect hits at 1 and 200 yards in challenging conditions. The radio call from the target pit confirmed what everyone watching already knew. Sarah had just performed at a level that defied explanation for a civilian participant. The applause that erupted from the observers was spontaneous and genuine. Even Jake Morrison, whose ego had been thoroughly battered throughout the day, found himself clapping. This wasn't just good shooting. It was the kind of performance that entered legend. Sergeant Davis approached Sarah as she was packing her equipment, his expression serious and calculating. "Martinez, we need to talk, privately." They walked to a small office adjacent to the range, where Davis closed the door and gestured for Sarah to take a seat. For several moments, he studied her with the kind of professional assessment that came from decades of military experience. "I've been running training courses for 23 years, he began carefully. "I've seen some remarkable shooters come through these programs. Competition champions, military snipers, law enforcement marksmen who could thread a needle at distance. But what you did today goes beyond any of that." Sarah remained silent, her expression neutral but attentive. She knew this conversation was inevitable. had been preparing for it since the morning's first scenario. The techniques you're using, the tactical awareness you've displayed, the way you approach each scenario, that's not civilian training, Davis continued. Hell, it's not even standard military training. You've had specialized instruction at the highest levels. Davis leaned forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. I've trained enough professionals to recognize the real thing when I see it. You're not some weekend warrior who got lucky with expensive equipment. You're operating at a level that suggests extensive experience in situations where missing isn't an option. The silence stretched between them, filled with implications and unspoken questions. Sarah knew she could continue deflecting, could maintain the fiction that had brought her to this course. But looking at Davis, seeing the genuine respect and professional curiosity in his eyes, she made a decision that would change everything. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah reached into her gear bag and withdrew a leather credentials case. She opened it and placed it on the desk between them, the badge and identification facing Davis. The sergeant's eyes widened as he read the credentials. FBI Critical Incident Response Group, Hostage Rescue Team. His voice carried a note of awe that hadn't been there moments before. You're HRT. Sarah nodded once, her expression serious. Special Agent Sarah Martinez, 5 years with the Bureau, 3 with HRT, counterterrorism operations, hostage rescue, high-risk arrest support. Davis sat back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. The FBI's hostage rescue team was legendary in law enforcement circles, an elite unit whose members were selected from the cream of military and police snipers. Their training was among the most rigorous in the world, their operational requirements demanding perfection under the most extreme circumstances. Why? Davis asked simply. Why let them think you were just a civilian? You could have identified yourself from the beginning. Sarah's expression softened slightly, revealing a hint of the exhaustion that came from constantly proving herself in male-dominated environments. Because I wanted to see if my skills could speak for themselves, because I'm tired of having my credentials questioned every time I walk into a room, because sometimes it's better to let the shooting do the talking. Davis nodded slowly, understanding flooding his features. And now? Now the afternoon session becomes more interesting, Sarah replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Because tomorrow we move to advanced tactical scenarios, and I suspect some of these gentlemen might benefit from learning a few things they didn't teach in their regular training courses. Outside, the other participants were discussing the day's events in increasingly animated tones. None of them suspected that their assumptions about the quiet civilian with the expensive rifle were about to be shattered completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring revelations that would transform their understanding of what they had witnessed. Sarah Martinez, FBI special agent and member of one of the world's most elite tactical units, was about to step out of the shadows and into her true role as an instructor rather than a student. The badge that had remained hidden throughout the day would soon tell a story that none of them were prepared to hear. The next morning arrived with an electric tension that seemed to charge the very air at the training facility. Word of Sarah's extraordinary performance had spread overnight through the informal networks that connected law enforcement and military professionals. What had begun as a routine advanced marksmanship course had transformed into something unprecedented. Sergeant Davis stood before the assembled group with a different demeanor than he'd shown the previous day. Behind him, Sarah sat quietly in the front row, her rifle case at her feet and her credentials folder resting on the table before her. The other participants sensed something had changed, but none could have predicted what was about to unfold. Gentlemen, Davis began, his voice carrying the authority of someone about to deliver significant news. Yesterday you witnessed shooting that defied your understanding of civilian capabilities. Today, you're going to learn why. Jake Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The previous evening had been difficult for his ego. He'd found himself questioning years of confidence in his own abilities. Marcus Thompson leaned forward with obvious curiosity, while David Chen wore the expression of someone who suspected he was about to have his world view adjusted. Before we continue with today's scenarios, I want you to meet your fellow participant properly, Davis continued. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself? Sarah rose smoothly and turned to face the group. Gone was the hesitant civilian who had arrived the previous morning. In her place stood a professional whose bearing and confidence spoke of experiences that went far beyond weekend competitions. Good morning, she said, her voice clear and strong. My name is Special Agent Sarah Martinez, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She picked up her credentials folder and held it open for all to see. I'm a member of the FBI's hostage rescue team assigned to the Critical Incident Response Group. The silence that followed was absolute. Jake Morrison's mouth fell open in obvious shock. Marcus Thompson sat back as if he'd been physically struck. David Chen stared at the credentials with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of the situation had just been inverted. For those unfamiliar with HRT, Sarah continued, we're the FBI's primary tactical unit for high-risk operations. Counterterrorism, hostage rescue, arrest of dangerous fugitives, and specialized surveillance operations. We deploy worldwide in support of Bureau operations and assist local law enforcement with incidents beyond their tactical capabilities. Carlos Rivera found his voice first. You've been FBI this whole time? Why didn't you say something yesterday? Sarah's smile held no malice, but it carried the confidence of someone who had just proven a significant point. Because I wanted to see if my abilities would be respected on their own merit. I'm tired of walking into rooms where my credentials are questioned before my skills are evaluated. The implications hit the group like a series of physical blows. Every condescending comment, every dismissive glance, every assumption about her being out of place in their professional environment was suddenly reframed in the harsh light of reality. They hadn't been watching an amateur get lucky. They'd been witnessing one of the most elite tactical operators in the world demonstrate skills they could barely comprehend. HRT selection makes Navy SEAL training look like summer camp, Marcus Thompson said slowly, his voice filled with dawning understanding. The shooting standards alone eliminate 90% of candidates. Sarah nodded. The course is 14 weeks of the most intensive tactical training in law enforcement. Candidates come from military special operations, SWAT teams, and bureau agents with exemplary records. The washout rate runs about 85%. Jake Morrison ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to process the revelation. So when I made that crack about you handling the rifle, you were talking to someone who qualifies quarterly at distances up to 1,500 yards, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Someone who's made shots under operational conditions that most people only see in movies. The weight of their assumptions was becoming crushingly apparent. David Chen, whose SWAT credentials had made him confident in his expertise, looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I feel like an idiot, he said quietly. Don't, Sarah said, and for the first time her voice carried genuine warmth rather than professional courtesy. You reacted based on your experience. Most women in shooting sports are hobbyists or competitors. You had no reason to expect someone with my background. Sergeant Davis stepped forward to address the group. Agent Martinez has agreed to share some of her expertise with us today. The scenarios we'll be running are based on actual HRT operations, adapted for training purposes. You're about to see tactical shooting at a level most of you have never experienced. The first scenario involved a simulated terrorist barricade situation with multiple hostages and complex fields of fire. Instead of the straightforward target identification exercises from the previous day, participants would need to engage multiple threats simultaneously while coordinating with simulated tactical teams. Sarah took the lead instructor role naturally, her professional demeanor commanding immediate respect from participants who, 12 hours earlier, had questioned her right to be there. She explained the tactical considerations with the authority of someone who had faced similar situations under live fire. In HRT operations, we often work in pairs or small teams, she explained, setting up the scenario. Communication is critical, and every shot has to be perfect. There are no do-overs when hostage lives are at stake. She demonstrated the scenario first, moving through the complex engagement with fluid precision. Her shots were timed to coordinate with simulated team movements, each one calculated to neutralize threats without endangering civilians. It was a masterclass in tactical shooting that left the other participants in awe. Jake Morrison struggled with the scenario's complexity, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "This is impossible," he muttered after missing 3 of 5 targets. "How do you process all this information while maintaining accuracy?" "Training," Sarah replied simply. "We practice scenarios like this hundreds of times until the decision-making becomes instinctive. Muscle memory handles the shooting mechanics while your brain focuses on tactical assessment." Marcus Thompson performed better, his military background helping him understand the tactical elements even if his shooting couldn't match Sarah's standard. "The mental processing speed required for this is incredible," he said after completing his run. "It's like trying to play chess while running a marathon." David Chen's SWAT experience gave him some advantage, but even he struggled with the complexity. "We train for scenarios like this," he admitted, "but not at these distances with these precision requirements. Urban SWAT work is usually much closer range." As the day progressed, Sarah shared insights from actual operations without revealing classified details. She explained how HRT snipers coordinate with assault teams, how they make split-second decisions about target engagement, and how they prepare mentally for situations where failure means innocent deaths. "The psychological pressure is unlike anything else," she told the group during a break. "In competition shooting, a miss costs you points. In our work, a miss might cost someone their life. The mental preparation is as important as the physical training." The afternoon brought even more challenging scenarios based on actual HRT missions. A simulated aircraft hijacking exercise required precise shots through aircraft windows at acute angles. A terrorist camp scenario involved multiple long-range targets in a complex environment with civilians present. Each exercise demonstrated the enormous gap between even elite conventional training and the specialized skills required for HRT operations. Sarah's performance remained flawless, but more importantly, her instruction began improving the others' capabilities dramatically. "You're not just a phenomenal shooter," Marcus observed after completing a scenario with significantly better results than his morning attempts. "You're a gifted instructor. You can break down complex skills into teachable components." "It's part of our job," Sarah replied. "HRT members regularly train local law enforcement for high-risk situations. Teaching tactical skills is as important as applying them operationally." By the end of the day, the transformation in group dynamics was complete. The men who had questioned Sarah's presence 24 hours earlier were now hanging on her every word, seeking advice on techniques and training methods they could apply to their own work. Jake Morrison approached her during the final equipment cleanup, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility. "Agent Martinez, I owe you an apology. The things I said yesterday were completely out of line." Sarah's response was gracious but firm. "You don't owe me an apology for your assumptions, Jake. You owe it to yourself to examine why you made them. Every woman in law enforcement and military service faces those same assumptions every day." David Chen joined the conversation, still shaking his head at the day's revelations. "I've been in SWAT for 15 years and I thought I understood tactical shooting. Today made me realize how much I still have to learn." "That's the difference between good professionals and great ones," Sarah told him. "Great ones never stop learning, never assume they know everything. Your willingness to learn from today's experience tells me more about your character than yesterday's assumptions did." As the group prepared to leave, Carlos Rivera asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. Why reveal yourself now? You could have maintained the fiction and just walked away. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. Because representation matters. Because somewhere there's a young woman considering a career in law enforcement or military service who needs to know that people like her can excel at the highest levels. Because silence in the face of assumptions doesn't change anything. Sergeant Davis gathered the group for final remarks, his respect for Sarah evident in every word. Ladies and gentlemen, you've had the privilege of training with one of the finest tactical operators in federal law enforcement. Agent Martinez has shown you what excellence looks like when it's built on dedication, training, and refusal to accept limitations others try to impose. As the participants dispersed, each carried with them a fundamentally altered understanding of assumptions, capabilities, and the danger of judging others by appearance rather than performance. Sarah's rifle case, which had drawn their mockery 2 days earlier, now represented something entirely different, a symbol of expertise earned through dedication and excellence, maintained under the most demanding circumstances. The badge that had remained hidden throughout the first day's shooting had finally told its story. But more than revealing Sarah's credentials, it had exposed the assumptions and biases that shaped how her abilities were initially perceived. The young woman they had dismissed as an amateur had taught them lessons that extended far beyond marksmanship, lessons about respect, competence, and the cost of underestimating others based on surface impressions. In the end, the rifle had never been a joke. The only joke had been their assumption that they understood what they were seeing without bothering to look beneath the surface. Sarah Martinez, FBI special agent and member of the hostage rescue team, had allowed her work to speak for itself, and its message had been impossible to ignore.